1 in 5 Americans suffer from chronic pain. Many are now using CBD for relief.
Activists are hoping pot could be legalized nationwide by the end of 2019.
When we look at premium cannabis, the Illinois House approved legalizing recreational marijuana.
Welcome to The Budding Report, a weekly show centered around all things cannabis. Please join us in welcoming our host, Charles Horton, and his co-host, Melissa Nasits, as they share the latest in cannabis news, conduct interviews with top leaders in the cannabis space, and promote some of the latest in science and innovation. And now to our host, Charles Horton.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Budding Report. The news is pretty full, a lot going on today, so we're going to be spending a bit more time on the news. We got a Texas judge blocking the smokable hemp ban, so we're going to be discussing that. And probably more importantly for everybody in the United States, USDA rules loom and industries pressuring for change. You could read the new law as it's eliminating the entire industry, and others read it as it's not enforceable and everything's going to go on. So Chris Perri is now joining us as a co-host, and he's going to be a regular on the show, giving us a legal view into everything that's going on, as well as Dr. Shaw continuing to give us a medical view of everything going on. So it's great to round out our group of hosts. But Melissa, how are you doing today?
I'm great, and apparently I got the memo that we're going colorful today. We needed to brighten up the studio, so luckily, it's not clashing quite so much, but anyway, it's good to see you. I'm glad to be here.
So I ordered some new shirts online, trying to be colorful. I'm told that I'm a little too starched to be on a cannabis show, so I'm trying to relax it up a little bit, and so I got these new shirts to wear. You know, Dr. Shaw is always wearing his t-shirts, and I like my t-shirts as well. That's how I typically dress, but trying to change it up a bit. And then I couldn't even shave today because I ran out of shaving cream. So here we are. But let's start and welcome Chris Perri joining us, and let's start talking about the Texas judge blocking the smokable hemp ban. Chris, what's going on in Texas?
Well, you've got a Democrat judge in Austin who saw the light. Judge Livingston made a great call here. She decided that when you look at these restraining orders, the way, just to give your audience an idea of how she's making her decision, she's balancing the harm that could be caused to the CBD hemp industry if she doesn't grant the restraining order versus the chances of their success at the lawsuit. So it is an indicator that she thinks they have some chance of success because she did find in favor of the industry going against the regulators in Texas. And I think the key of her decision is that the regulation people in Texas, they only were supposed to be able to regulate the processing and manufacture. And this smokable hemp ban goes way beyond that because it regulates the distribution and retail as well, which may be going beyond the regulatory powers that they were given by the Texas legislature. So that's the big question, and Judge Livingston apparently is deciding it on the side of the industry here.
And has that been appealed yet by the Texas government, or do you know?
They will appeal it. They have 30 days to file that notice of appeal, and they certainly will because they'll get a friendlier forum as they go up the stage. So they'll go to the Third Court of Appeals, which actually has gotten a little better in recent years. There was a turnover in 2018 of 3 progressives entered and replaced 3 conservatives who probably would have gone the other way on the issue. And then we go up to the Texas Supreme Court. Fortunately, the Texas Supreme Court won't hear that case until probably after the election in 2020, and it's looking like they could replace a couple of people on that Supreme Court. So it could be a friendlier forum as that appeal progresses.
But do you feel like it's going to progress pretty quickly through, even though you're looking at after the election, or is this something that could get held up in court for a while?
It could get held up in court. Usually an appeal of a restraining order like this, an interlocutory order, will progress a little quicker than if there's a final judgment. And they should expedite it since it's interlocutory if they're going to appeal the restraining order. But nothing ever moves fast on the appellate front, I'll put it that way. So I wouldn't expect a decision all the way up through the 2 appellate courts until probably 2020.
Well, that's good news. As a entrepreneur, I've had my share of time in court, and it's interesting. Typically, based on whatever judge we're assigned to, we generally know the outcome of the case. So a lot of times an attorney will tell me, you know, you're going to lose this, so you need to settle as quickly as possible. And it's not based on the merits of the law, it's based on the judge. And then in other cases, I have a different judge and they say, hey, you're winning this, you're going to get it dismissed right away, keep pushing forward. So you think some of that comes into play with the different courts in Texas?
Oh, it absolutely does. We elect judges in Texas. So judges are political beings, and you can usually tell what a political being is going to do. I know they try to say that they're subservient to the law, but anytime you're elected, you really are also, you're just naturally, subconsciously, always subservient to the campaign contributions and the people that got you elected as well.
Well, I think that's really interesting, and I think that, you know, possibly even having this hold up a little bit more until we have a chance to get a more how do you say, more passionate regarding cannabis judges in political positions, without stating one political party or another, that it might be very beneficial. Because as far as the smokable hemp, I think having had previous guests on here that are bringing in smokable hemp cigarettes, the opportunity to get people off of nicotine, which is an extremely addictive substance, onto something that is actually beneficial, is something that we should be looking at and we should be pushing forward. I mean, for full body health, for, you know, the economic reasons. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So, you know, it's unfortunate when you see these sort of bans happen that seem to be based on ignorance more than anything else.
Absolutely. I think that cannabis is becoming accepted. It's a bipartisan acceptance. It's coming up. I mean, I ran for Congress a couple of years ago, and the one issue on the campaign trail that united everybody across party lines pretty much was cannabis legality. It's helping people that were older, traditionally Republicans, are turning and saying, you know what, I want this to be an issue that even my party takes up and legalizes. So I think you're seeing across the board bipartisan acceptance. And as that increases, you're going to see more and more judges realizing that they're not going to get reelected, Republican or Democrat, if they don't start seeing the light here.
Now, we've talked in the past about the reason that this was done, or at least some of my law enforcement friends have said that, is because it makes it difficult for law enforcement to pull somebody over thinking that it's cannabis when it turns into hemp. And so for the longest time, they just weren't doing any kind of arrests in Texas. What do you think it's going to look like on the criminal side of it for the next year or so?
Yeah, well, I think that if police officers are thinking that this ban of smokable hemp gives them the right to search probable cause based on the smell of what they were going to say is freshly burned marijuana, I think they're wrong, because as we kind of mentioned last week, the ban does not ban people from actually smoking it. It just bans the retailer from selling it. So if you're able to get your hands on an off-label use, or just get it and then smoke it, you're not doing anything illegal. So if the cop says that if they're smelling it and they can't tell the difference between smokable hemp versus smokable marijuana, I don't think they have probable cause. And I think lawyers need to litigate that more and not just lay down and take it when the cops do those types of searches.
And so we have to remember what you educated us on a previous episode, that you do not give consent for a search. Is that correct?
Yes, just say no. I mean, they used to use it in the 80s as a slogan for a totally different purpose. But if you're interacting with the cops and you don't know anything else to say other than one word, just say no.
But be polite, right? You want to be polite to the police officers.
Absolutely. You can say no politely. I've said no politely many times.
Christian, Ryan, either of you have anything you want to add to this discussion?
Well, in my experience, I think that I know that it's probably difficult for a doctor to prescribe a patient to smoke anything, but vaporizing is a whole different game. And I know there's certain ailments where vaporizing, inhaling cannabis, offers one of the fastest delivery methods out there. So, I mean, I think it's critical, especially from the patient's point of view, if the onset of edibles is not an option, not having smokable hemp or hemp that can be vaporized for CBD, I really feel for the patient. They're the ones that will suffer.
And from one other thing we talked about on a previous show, that at least in Texas, flower has essentially been decriminalized. But if you have edibles or vape, that's a completely different story. And there's people doing 50 years with those things, which is pretty sad. Dr. Shaw, anything you want to add?
I think ultimately this comes down to education, and unfortunately it's a very slow process. The potential for cannabinoid medicine is really at the point that we can't even begin to completely appreciate how much influence it could have on medicine. We can only speculate. That being said, the more that we can kind of get away from this propaganda that was pushed upon the plant several decades ago and try to deprogram and then re-educate the population, I think a lot of this then will start to dissipate.
So, Dr. Shaw, how would this ban potentially affect your research?
That's an interesting question, considering I tend to kind of tread, I'm a bit cavalier, let's say, and I think with my limited understanding, as long as I'm performing research, I can stay in a pretty protected space. I also use 0% THC-based CBD preparations. And in the state of Arizona, we don't really have any concern for utilizing that. They haven't really come down on CBD at the retail level as they have in many other states.
Interesting time and interesting discussion. Well, we're going to go away for a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're continuing the legal discussion with the USDA rules. So we'll be right back after this. Be sure and stay tuned.
Hello, coming to you from the outdoors where I do my heat training, and I did my repeats on the hills. It's actually pretty empty, but it's kind of close to 90 degrees. So that's when I squeeze in whenever I can, but I'm actually here to share what Simply Start, Simply Satisfy is. So this organic hemp oil, this is the serum Simply Start, and you can take it twice a day or once. I already took both of them in this morning, so now it's lunchtime. Real quick and easy, yummy, delicious, 30 calories. The other one is Simply Satisfy. So it's a spray, and also 3 sprays. You could do it once a day or twice a day. Again, I did it this morning. I'm doing it now at lunch. It helps you take care of your health and wellness. So learn more about them. Remember, 3 simple changes on how you can incorporate into your life. You can learn more at the link below. So stay safe and keep moving, keep training, and take care of your spirit, mind, and body.
Well, we're back, and we're moving on with our next news article. We're going over the USDA regulations looming, and they are pressuring the industry for change. So with such legal action, I'm going to flip it right back over to Chris. So you kind of led us through the previous article. Can you give us your opinion on this and kind of give us some guidelines and what we can expect with this?
Yeah, I mean, just to summarize it real quick, I mean, this is kind of the nightmare of the hodgepodge of regulations that happen in a federal government with 50 states. If you're going to almost let all of these states have different rules, and then you're going to say you all have to come under the same rules by October 31st. So basically, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has made October 31st, 2020, I guess this October 31st, Halloween, a scary day for many of the people in the hemp industry, because they're going to now possibly be criminally liable if their crops are over 5% THC, even though there's really no way for them to know that prior to all this testing. So it's basically a lot of these states like Kentucky, Oregon, California have been operating under a different set of rules since 2014, and then they're being expected to all of a sudden change the way they're doing things, and they don't have the infrastructure to really follow these rules now. Plus, I mean, where I come in as a criminal defense lawyer, my biggest concern is the fact that people could be criminally liable for something that they don't even know they're doing is criminal.
I found this so amazing that they could take something like a crop and say that you are going to be criminally charged if your level of THC is over this, especially in something that is almost a new crop. I mean, there's so many new growers that are just getting into this, just, literally dipping their toe in the water, so to speak, and to be actually being charged with something, I find this absolutely insane. This isn't a chemist lab. This isn't somewhere where we can actually test something as we go along. I mean, I know grape growers, and I know when you're testing for alcohol content, it's something that's constantly evolving. It's constantly changing. What can they do? What are their choices to protect themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's going to have I totally agree with you, and I think it's going to have a chilling effect on people not wanting to enter the industry, because it's hard to protect yourself if the law is written in a way that imposes such strict liability. Typically in criminal law, we have a mental state that attaches before you can have any type of criminal liability. But if the law is written in a way that explicitly disposes of that mental state, like these rules are, then it is hard for these people to protect themselves unless they have a chemist on staff or somebody on staff that can start this testing process for them way early, so they can know that their plants aren't over 5%. And that's one of the problems here, is they're being required to test 15 days, I think, before harvest, and they're not equipped to do this testing now. And if the testing comes out with something that is over the THC amount without them knowing, they could be liable. So it's a hard answer, Melissa, to tell you what they could do, because this is such a new territory where there aren't really ways for people to protect themselves, I think, other than employing this type of chemist to give them that type of advice. But that's going to drive up the costs and the fear for many people in the industry.
Now, I know you're not a expert in alcohol or anything, and I didn't even think about grapes, but are there any other industries where you as a grower could be put in jail? Like if your broccoli doesn't come out just right, you could be put in jail. It just seems insane to me that, you know.
My tomato plants I have no control. Sometimes I have little tiny.
Right. I mean, you should be in jail because your tomato didn't come out.
I'm failing as a gardener right now.
Well, do y'all remember when even like a company like Bluebell had the bacteria in the ice cream? Nobody got criminally liable for that, and that seems like way worse than having.
That could kill people.
Yeah, it could kill people. The listeria craze. So you have these industries with food with poison in it, and nobody's liable, and yet you're going to hold people criminally liable for having over 5% THC. It's just nuts.
So we were talking before the show about most laws are based on reasonableness, and I would say this isn't very reasonable. But a reasonable answer to me is that you have a safe harbor provision, and I've had discussions at different conferences with regulators. And why isn't there a safe harbor provision where if you get this type of seed from this particular manufacturer, you have a safe harbor, and if it comes out to be higher for some other reason than it's supposed to be, then you're not going to be criminally liable, and you have the ability to remediate it and have some of the THC taken out. What do you think about safe harbor provisions like that?
I think it's a great idea, and it shows the disconnect between these politicians crafting the regulations and the actual realities of the industry. And apparently they don't have people like you on the panels that create these rules to do something as reasonable as create a safe harbor provision. But they absolutely need to do that. I 100% agree.
Well, I volunteer you to be on one of those panels, please.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, you talk about the disconnect. I mean, I think that the fact that they're trying to enact this stuff as October 31st, when so many licenses will not expire until the end of the year, that seems like such an ultimate disconnect, because you're going to enact different regulations and different licensing before the other ones are even expired.
Yes, I 100% agree. When you have these regulatory schemes that just don't make sense like that they don't even have the right date on it to coincide with when things are expiring, it just creates extra obstacles and extra hoops for people to jump through. And that's honestly what causes outsiders to come into politics is when they talk about these crazy regulations that just make no sense and the type of government that causes them. I mean, I think that I don't even have to say the names of the type of people that can seize on that. But yeah, I mean, the government definitely digs itself a hole when they do things that basically, when they have these regulations that don't make sense and then hurt the economy, when there are ways to do it in a more sensible way that doesn't hurt the economy and hurt honest people that are just trying to honestly make a living.
Now, I own a CBD brand. Does this USDA rule affect me at all? It's always worried me. Like, we get a certificate of analysis before from the original manufacturer. We get it before it's shipped to us, and then we do a third COA to make sure all of the product is right. It doesn't have too high of THC. It doesn't have any of the carcinogens or nasty stuff in it. Do I need to be worried about this USDA rule?
No, I don't think you do need to be. I mean, it does sound like you're doing your due diligence, and you should do that. I don't even think you have to do that part, because the USDA rules are more on the manufacturing part and the actual agricultural development of it. Once it gets to you, it wouldn't be as much regulated by the USDA rules.
Dr. Shaw, what's your medical view on this USDA rule?
Again, I think it's entirely unnecessary. I think regulatory agencies just like to regulate, and it's almost a machine in and of itself. And there may be some good intentions at heart with trying to establish some kind of a standard of process. Where I disagree is trying to link in the potential, liability for criminal association for the fact that you have this decided upon percentage THC above what would be acceptable. I think that aspect should certainly be removed, and focus on what they want to really achieve, which I believe should be ensuring the quality standard of product and removing any of this criminality associated with it.
What do you believe that should be allowed for remediation? So, I know there's labs that can take the THC level out, and to solve the problem about moving the product, they've come up with mobile labs. Which of those are you for? Which of them are you against, and why?
This is a tough question, because, not to oversimplify, but you see all the problems that are arising in all these areas of trying to over-regulate THC. If hypothetically this was legalized at a federal level, all this would go away. And so the idea that you are doing these massive extractions, and over time, even with materials that are compliant with the Farm Bill having THC levels at 0.3% or below, you're going to create a considerable amount of pure THC. And why should that be destroyed if it has therapeutic potential? Could there be a way to utilize that, store it in some longer term facility to a point where once all these legal considerations of criminality, non-criminality get ironed out, could we then access that? But I had heard about this years ago, and the first thing that comes to mind is, hey, let's start a company where we can be one of the remediators, and we'll come pick up all your liquid THC and we'll store it away. But quite honestly, I think it would be completely wasteful to destroy this product because of this current lack of agreement on its criminal status and its scheduling.
I visited a lab about a year ago, and they showed me these big 5-gallon kind of milk cartons or water cartons, and it was all a white powder, and they said that was all the THC they removed, and I asked them what they can do with it, and they said they can't even legally really have it. They don't have the license to have that, so there's really nothing that they can do with it. Chris, what is the reasonable legal standard? What should be allowed for remediation?
I think the reasonable legal standard, I think, would be that it's all legal and have it uniform. I think that the day and age of having it illegal in federal government, when you have all these states having contradicting laws, the federal government just needs to remove that and make it so that each state can decide the remediation levels themselves.
Well, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I just have a question. Since we have Ryan Douglas, who is a master grower, on, so I would love to hear from your point of view as a grower. This is something that you'd be dealing with. So what would you do? What is your recommendation in this position?
So just to clarify, Chris, you mentioned 5%. Is it 5% or 0.5% THC?
I'm sorry, it's 0.5%. That's absolutely right.
Okay.
0.5%.
So that's even worse, right? So
yeah, 5%. Yeah. No. Thank you. Thank you for correcting that.
So the problem is the fluctuations in the cannabinoid levels of the plant can be influenced by factors outside of the grower's control. So even if you have a certain variety of hemp that has, we'll just take Texas, for example. If you have a certain variety of hemp that over multiple crop cycles has shown that it produces less than 0.3 or less than 0.5 THC, in the event you have a really hot, dry growing season, that can shoot those THC levels much higher than you're anticipating. So you've got a grower that's breaking the law, not knowing they're breaking the law, and it's caused by factors outside of their control. So the problem is exacerbated because farmers that are growing large plots of land typically would plant a hemp crop from seed. And there's so much variability in seeds that you're guaranteed to have THC and CBD levels all over the map. So I think putting a cap of 0.3 or 0.5 THC on the crop is unrealistic. Giving a little bit more flexibility on how to modify or remediate the final product makes a lot more sense, because it's almost impossible to plant a large field of hemp and guarantee consistently year after year that every single plant is going to test below 0.5 THC. It's just not realistic.
That sure sounds reasonable to me. Ryan, in your view, is on-site remediation a valid option, or is that unrealistic and unreasonable as well?
So by on-site remediation, you mean basically diluting? If you're
they
growing
bring
hemp to
the lab
harvest,
to you on the back of a truck, and they dilute the product. They remediate it on site.
So absolutely. I'm not an expert in extraction, but it makes sense to me. And in the cannabis business, there's so many unfulfilled opportunities that are creating business opportunities for entrepreneurs that, that's I guess a positive angle of the situation, but on-site remediation makes sense to me.
So how does, I don't know the differences as far as the disruption to you. What is the disruption to a grower between doing it on site and going ahead and selling the product and letting the final lab do the remediation of the product?
So most commercial growers, it would actually be the same process, because they're going to grow a crop of hemp, then they're going to harvest and dry it, and then at that point begins the extraction or remediation process. So whether it's done on site or done off site or done by a mobile service probably doesn't affect the grower that much.
Well, great discussion, good information, and good to know. We're going to go back on a commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to be totally focused on learning about Ryan and Ryan Douglas Cultivation. So we will be right back.
Hello. Here on my lunch run in the middle of the heat, where I get my break really quick after training clients and leading some classes. I am taking my Simply Satisfy. It is 3 sprays, organic hemp. Next one is my Simply Start. You can take it twice a day or once a day. I already took one morning dose. I'm now taking my afternoon dose. One little yummy organic hemp. Check them out. Simply Generous. Helicopter. All right, time to go train and run down the hill. Bye-bye.
Well, we're back again, and this time we are focusing on Ryan Douglas of Ryan Douglas Cultivations. He has been a master grower since 2013 until 2016. We're very excited to have him here as our guest. He has been featured in Vice, the New York Times, as well as Bloomberg News. And after 15 years of commercial greenhouse growing of ornamental and edible crops, I think he can probably tell us a little bit about cannabis. So we're very excited. So what is it that you do exactly, Ryan? Besides just grow.
Well, first, thanks for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here. So in a nutshell, I'm a cultivation consultant. So I work closely with newly licensed cannabis cultivators to help them rapidly launch their businesses. So they come to market quickly and they spend less money getting there.
How did you originally get involved in the cannabis industry?
So before even touching a cannabis plant, I spent 15 years growing flowers and vegetables throughout the U.S. So working for large commercial greenhouse operations. In a typical year, I would grow up to about 500,000 plants. And as cannabis slowly became decriminalized, I began becoming interested in keeping the same line of work, but just growing a different crop. So instead of poinsettias and Easter lilies, it was cannabis. So I managed to land a job with Tweed Inc., which was one of the first licensed producers in Canada, and that company quickly became Canopy Growth Corporation. So they hired me to direct cultivation for that company, from pre-license through licensing, launch, and expansion, and it was an amazing 3 years.
So how would clients potentially benefit from your services?
So typically what I do is help clients to avoid the typical startup mistakes. So they end up launching their business quickly. They're one of the first movers, which is critical in those markets where there's a lot of demand and very few suppliers, so they can take advantage of some excellent price points. I help clients to avoid unnecessary expenses during the startup phase, and really kind of help lay the foundation for seamless expansion to additional sites if the company believes that's an appropriate move at the time.
Tell us, Ryan, why the work you do is important.
Well, I think anytime you have a new cannabis program implemented in a state or a country for the first time, you have a number of stakeholders that can really benefit from a startup cultivation business being successful. So the first is the business, right? So if they can manage to launch quickly, come to market quickly, take advantage of the demand, they can begin generating revenue immediately. Their investors can get a return on their investment much faster. So the business wins. But other stakeholders that can benefit from a successful business are the consumers as well. So whether it's a medical market or a recreational market, these folks now have the legal right to possess and consume cannabis. But if the growers are really taking their time or making tons of mistakes, it's the consumers that really suffer. And in my opinion, the third stakeholder is the government, because the government does not want to regret having legalized cannabis. So having a number of licensed companies quickly start up, come to market quickly with quality product that's compliant, in my view, by helping the entrepreneur, the cultivation business, actually everybody wins.
So I'm an investor. What do you see as the greatest opportunity globally for the cannabis cultivation business, and why? Where do I put my money?
So without question, it's the U.S. For the next coming years, the U.S. And that's coming from someone that has worked internationally for the last 4 years as a consultant, and then 3 years prior to that in Canada. So the reasoning is, let's just take for an example, if 20 countries legalized cannabis today, it would take years for those programs to come to fruition. So you've got to establish the licensing program. You've got to license the growers. They need to establish cultivation, ramp up capacity, grow a number of crops. The retail format needs to be established. So we're looking at years before actually any money exchanges hands. So international opportunities, I'm very optimistic, but in terms of the demand, like right now, it's the US. So you look at places like Illinois and Michigan, where there's much more demand than there is supply. Or you look at places like Arizona, where they have a thriving medical market, and then everyone you speak to down there is convinced that come November, they'll legalize cannabis for recreational use. So what you're going to have is this massive boom. You're going to have a ton of demand immediately, and you'll have a lot of these companies that need to expand while they protect their medical patient base. They need to expand to meet the new demand for recreational markets. So in terms of the most exciting opportunity for investors, I think international, it's a much longer play. But in the US, we have immediate needs in the next 6 months to the next couple of years, where I think we're just going to see explosive growth. I think we're all going to be surprised by how big the cannabis industry gets in the US.
A follow-up question on that. Are you more bullish on public companies or private companies? I jumped into some public company investments about a year and a half ago thinking that it hit the bottom, and now I'm about 50% of where I thought the bottom was.
You know, that's a tough call. I've worked for both private companies and public companies, and I've invested in both. So from my perspective, from my investment portfolio, both the private and public companies are a little bit low at the moment. But I think as soon as a lot more activity ramps up in the US, I think they're both going to increase in lockstep.
I have a question. It's sort of a follow-up. You've mentioned Canada a couple of times, and having spent some time, I believe it was with Tweed, is what you mentioned?
Yes.
Did that give you an insight, sort of, to give you a launching place for the U.S., since Canada, especially British Columbia, tends to be a little more progressive in their cannabis legalization and use?
So I think probably the most important factor is the level of regulation that they had in Canada. So when I started with canopy growth in 2013, the cannabis licensing program was overseen by Health Canada. And so they had very strict regulations regarding how you can and cannot produce cannabis. And that was juxtaposed to what I had seen in the US, and I still see on occasion in the US, where these are grow operations that I can't believe what they're producing is considered medicinal, because it's just you would not want to. I didn't even want to step foot into some of these grow operations, and they're selling pounds and pounds of medicine in their dispensaries. So the experience in Canada really helped prepare me for consulting with projects in the US, because I can come at it with a very compliant standpoint. So we can design the production facility, create the cultivation protocols in a way where the consumer will never be at risk, and the producer will never be at risk of a recall or kind of falling on the bad side of the law, because the company culture and the protocols are created with compliance in mind from the get-go. And I learned that in Canada.
So building off one of your answers previously to Charles' question about focusing on the United States, for the near future, if an entrepreneur wanted to launch their own commercial cannabis growth operation, what are some key factors that they should keep in mind?
So there's a lot. I'll briefly just touch on the top 3 or so. So the most important factor in a cultivation business is the head grower. So what I find time and time again is that startup companies hire for cannabis experience, but they don't hire for commercial plant production experience. And so the difference is, if you have a home grower that does really well with 6 plants in their basement, or a couple dozen plants outdoors, and now you put them in charge of launching a production facility where they need to manage 10,000 plants and dozens of employees, that's a huge jump. And it can be overwhelming for the grower. And the learning curve is really long and expensive, and the company usually ends up footing the bill for that. So my recommendation is actually for these companies that plan to have a large commercial facility, pull from traditional horticulture. Find a commercial greenhouse grower that's been growing flowers or vegetables, and then just supplement their knowledge with cannabis-specific expertise from a cultivation consultant or a cannabis expert. So in my experience, that's a really, it's a sure way of launching quickly by hiring the right kind of head grower. The second key factor to keep in mind is the design of the facility. It's critical to have experts design production facilities. So if it's indoor, it's like using mechanical engineers to develop the HVAC system and the dehumidification system. Or if it's a greenhouse, hiring an architect or a greenhouse design company to design the greenhouse. Because too often in my experience, I found groups try to save money and they do it in-house, and it never works out well. It costs whatever they save, they end up spending 5 times that to try to retrofit the facility and fix the problem. And probably the third most important factor is launching with an appropriate cultivation strategy. So what I've seen are companies that, they do the research, they talk to experts, and they launch their facility using a really advanced method of growing. So we've all heard of hydroponics, but even in hydroponics, there's levels of complexity. And some groups launch using the most advanced method of growing out there. And the problem is this kind of growing has a very small margin of error. And so with a startup, startups in any industry, it's never pretty, it's never perfect. And when you launch a facility using a very advanced method of growing, the chances of crop failure increase exponentially. So I always recommend startups, don't be afraid to be boring when you start. Launch with a cultivation method that's proven. Grow a way that people have been growing for decades. And then once you get established and you have multiple crops and you have revenue coming in, then would be an appropriate time to look at upgrading or changing how you do things. But in my experience, there's plenty of grow books out there that show you how to grow cannabis, but there's really no authoritative source on how to plan and launch a commercial cultivation facility rapidly. So that's exactly what drove me to actually write a book on exactly that topic. So what I've done is distilled 2 decades of commercial plant production experience down into an easy to read book. So entrepreneurs from any industry can plan and launch their cultivation facility with the greatest chance for success.
Is your book come out, and where will it be available?
So the book should be out in October. It's called From Seed to Success: How to Launch a Great Cannabis Cultivation Business in Record Time. So that'll be available through Amazon. And as a special offer to your viewers, if they want to reach out to me at my website, I can offer them a promotional discount for the purchase of the printed book or the ebook. So if anybody just wants to hop onto my website, it's douglascultivation.com. And you can just write me a short note on the contact page, and I'll go ahead and send you a promotional discount for the book.
Ryan, thank you very much for being on. I can't wait to take a look at your book myself. For the viewers out there, certainly contact Ryan if you didn't have your pen out in time. You can also get all of our guests and hosts' contact information on our website at thebuddingreport.com. So Ryan, again, thank you for coming on. Chris, you did a great job in your first time as one of our co-hosts. Dr. Shaw, always appreciate you. And Melissa, this is just so much fun doing with you. So that's the end of our show for today. Thanks again for being on, everybody. Next week, please join us for Adam Trink of the Rose Law Group and another chef, Chef Sebastian. So looking forward to that show. And man, we need to get samples on one of these shows soon, because talking about food and not getting to try it's just killing me. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you back next week on the Budding Report.